Christian Parenting.
Continuing with part 2 of our Money Matters series, today we're going to get into the nitty-gritty as we talk about financial literacy from mom and dad. You're going to love my guest, Donna Hosang, a Ramsey Solutions certified financial coach and a sweet friend of mine from my own local church.
What can we cut down in our budget to throw more money at our debt? And it's kind of like that. And unfortunately, for people who do have debt, you do have to change your habits. And that's a hard thing to do sometimes, but not if you work together on it. And that's the thing I love.
I'm Jay Holland, and I want to welcome you to Let's Parent on Purpose. This is a podcast for parents who want to thrive and not just survive their parenting years. Each week, I'll bring you an insight or an interview that will help strengthen your marriage, your parenting skills, or your personal walk with Jesus. If you like what you hear, you can subscribe, share it with your friends. Go to letsparentonpurpose.com for more details. And if you really like it, you can sign up for my Things for Thursday email and get a copy of my Fun Family Conversations ebook by texting the word THINGS, THINGS, to 66866. As I mentioned in my last podcast, I do a lot of premarital counseling. And as I do, I tell the couples that money, sex, and communication, if you can master those big three, you can build a marriage that thrives. Of course, it takes the blessing of God. It takes the Holy Spirit. But I've seen more families crumble and destroy because of lack of trust or lack of handling of their finances, of the sexual purity of their marriage, or their ability to communicate with one another. So let's tackle one of the big three today as we talk about financial literacy for mom and dad. My hope is that as you listen to this, if you have been somebody who has done a good job of getting your finances in order, then you're probably actually going to be the kind of person that would listen to this anyway, because you've already realized the importance of this and the value of this. And so you know that it's great to hear refreshers and to just be reminded of some of the things that maybe you've gotten loose on. I know that was good for me as I did this interview conversation with Donna. And if you are in a spot where you're young and not married yet, I know we have a number of listeners actually who invest in their time in listening to this podcast. They're not married. They're not even necessarily in a relationship yet, but they realize that they are prepping for the future. And I super commend you. I've got to hear from some of you. I know some of you personally. Very proud of you. This is one of those life-changing episodes today, if you can get this. So if you're young and not even married or in a relationship yet, or you're young married and your finances are a dumpster fire, you're going to really benefit from not only this lesson, but the fact that Donna offers herself as a personal mentor if you need some further help on this. And so in the show notes, I'll put ways to get in contact with her. Donna Hosang is a member of Covenant Fellowship Baptist Church, where I am one of the pastors. And I got to meet her and really get to know her as we served in Spain on a mission trip that we did, serving a few dozen missionary families to the Muslim world. And we took care of their kids. And Donna took care of an autistic, deaf, special needs young lady for a week nearly by herself. She is an amazing human being, and she's also very wise. She's walked through a lot of very difficult things in her own life, and because of the pre-thinking and planning and wise stewardship and conservative financial pathway that she and her husband took through their marriage, Donna has been able to thrive, not just throughout her marriage, but in her retirement years, during a time when a lot of people just are crippled and shackled by debt or living paycheck to paycheck. So dive into this, take notes, check out the show notes for it. And if you really need some extra help or just a little bit of coaching and talking, be sure to contact my sweet friend Donna. Here's our conversation. Donna, it is so good to hear your voice. The last time we were together, it feels like, well, nearly last time we were on an airplane coming back from Spain. How have you been in the last several months of your life?
Well, it's been actually awesome, even though the COVID-19 has kind of put a damper on things for everyone. I luckily have stayed healthy, and so have all the people in my family. So I've been really well, and I actually have been spending the summer in northern New Hampshire, and am just ready to start thinking about heading home to Florida.
I wouldn't think about it yet. It still feels like it's the dead of summer. Maybe give it a little bit more. I'm just jealous of New Hampshire right now.
Well, it was 40 degrees the other morning, so yeah, that's too cold for a Florida girl.
It's getting there for me. So the reason that I actually wanted to have you on this podcast was a conversation that we had as we were on that marathon plane ride after our mission trip to Spain, just about what the Lord had done in your life and how having your financial house in order had prepared you for what the Lord was going to do next. So would you just briefly go into your story of how you got into having this passion to help families get their finances in order?
Yes, I'd be glad to. So I am a mom. I have three children. One of my daughters passed away just before she was 40. That's my daughter, Karen. And also my husband passed away about 5 years ago. But as a young family, Karen, our oldest daughter, Karen, had a lot of medical concerns. She was born with Down syndrome and had congenital heart defect, and we never knew when she was going to be healthy or when she wasn't going to be healthy. And so we just, when she was born, we were elated because we were so excited to have her, but we had no idea what that would mean for us over the course of our lifetime together. But we always worked, John and I, my husband and I always worked, and having a child with a disability sometimes is tricky when you work because you never know what's going to come around the next corner. And one of the things I learned, but it took me a long time to learn it, was the more organized as a family we were in our daily lives, and especially in our financial lives, the easier it was for us whenever a crisis came along. So if you're in chaos financially, bills due, owe a lot of money, too much month at the end of the money, it makes it extremely difficult on you as a family. And then add to that any other kind of stress that the family has, whether you have foster children that are disrupting your family at times, or you have a child that's ill, or you have death in the family. Whenever you have a crisis like that, if your day-to-day life is in chaos, it just doubles the anxiety of what you have to go through with another chaos on top of that. So as time wore on, it occurred to me that if I could stay like really vigilant and be on top of our financial lives, that whenever we had a crisis with Karen, we were able to focus fully on that crisis and not so much on the rest of our lives. And after the crisis was over, we could look back at the rest of our lives and say, okay, we can just step right back in and get back to normal again. So that's kind of how things went for us.
As you're talking, Donna, I think about how financial planning is a weird mix of optimism and pessimism, where pessimism might be realism. The optimism is there is something that you can do to prepare for the future, but the realism or pessimism is something is going to happen that you don't see coming that is going to be potentially catastrophic depending on how you set yourself up beforehand. So
right, we call that Murphy's Law. Murphy is always going to come knocking on your door whether you expect it or not. And sometimes we're prepared and sometimes we're not. But the more prepared we can be, the better off we are.
So you went through a long period of your life under some significant family strain, and then that moved into other family strains. But because you had already set in place some solid financial principles, it didn't sink you. I'm just like telling the far end of the story is your daughter is in heaven, and you have the means to be able to travel and go on mission trips. You know, we got to go serve together in Spain, helping serve a couple dozen missionary families because of long-term decisions that you had made.
Exactly. That's exactly. And every day, I really thank the Lord for the hard work that my husband did and the hard work that I did throughout the course of the time that we raised our kids. We always realized how important it was to be on a budget. Now, the minute you say the word budget, some people are like, oh no, I can't do that. I hate to sit down and write it down, and because if you sit down and write it down, it becomes real. I'm absolutely serious. I mean, a lot of times people say, "Oh yeah, I'm in control of my finances. I pay all my bills, blah blah blah," and that might be true. But until you actually write that budget down, your money is in charge of you instead of you being in charge of your money. So one of the first things I always did, even as a kid before John and I got married, I always had a budget. I looked at what I had coming in. I looked at my bills. I looked at my tithing. I looked at my savings. And I said, okay, this is what this month is going to look like. This is what next month's going to look like. And even though sometimes I was off the mark, and again, I say but John and I did this together. We worked on this together. You have to work on it together. If you're a couple, you must work on it together. One person can be in charge of doing the finances, but you need to have a budget meeting a couple of times a month. And you need to put it in your calendar and say, okay, Friday night, we'll go out and get a cup of coffee. We're going to work on our budget, just so both partners understand what's going on. So the budgeting to me was critical. The second really important thing is having an emergency fund. And an emergency fund is critical because when Murphy does come knocking on your door, your washing machine breaks, you have to have a car repair, something unusual comes along that's not in your budget, you need to have that emergency fund. And I always suggest starting out with $1,000 of emergency fund. And some people say, oh my goodness, I could never save $1,000. Well, yes, you can. Look around your house, see what you can sell. Get a side gig, do a little bit extra babysitting. Before you know it, you have that $1,000. So there's your emergency fund. But the biggest part of what I think of staying financially stable is getting out of debt. If you're in debt now, getting out of debt. And if you're not in debt, don't get in debt. And that sounds really hard because most people have a car payment. A lot of people have medical bills. They buy things on their credit card, think that that's the way they have to live. And it works for some people, but it doesn't work for everyone. So for me, it would never have worked to live on my credit cards because I would have had this fear that something's going to happen with Karen. I'm going to have to take time off from work. I'm not going to get paid, and I won't be able to pay that bill. So we made sure that we always paid our credit card at the end of the month. But that also meant we knew how much we had to spend, and we couldn't overspend. So as I look back on other families that I knew when I was raising my children, we lived pretty frugally. We didn't take cruises. We didn't have lavish trips. We always had fun. We always visited family. That was our vacation, or family came to us. But it was always on the down low. It was always something that wouldn't cost us a lot of money. So that helped us.
Yeah, let me walk back through this. You're saying trying to get the floor stable underneath you, whether you're in good shape to start, and let's say you have plenty of money in the bank, or whether you're in chaos. You're saying the steps are really the same. First is establishing and writing down a budget. So not just like tracking at the end of the month what you spent, which is important, but starting out with a budget
at the beginning of the month.
Right, at the beginning, and both couple, they have to be on board for this.
Yeah,
And then second is getting that $1,000 emergency fund
exactly.
together. And you know what you're saying? I've been through Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace, and that was so motivating to me and my wife. It was early in our marriage when we went through, and when we got married and moved down to Florida, we had debt because of a couple of, one was medical expenses, and another was business stuff that then ended up not working out. But it was really interesting going through Financial Peace because we were like, we need to get out of debt, get out of debt, get out of debt. And instead, he's saying before you super tackle your debt, get your emergency fund, because if not, every time an emergency comes up, you're going to pile that back onto your debt. Over the long term, what I will say is having the emergency fund seems to keep emergencies away.
It does. It gives you breathing room, but that $1,000 is just the beginning.
Right.
That's just the beginning. And after you start your budgeting and get your first $1,000, the next thing you work on is getting out of debt. And it doesn't matter how much debt a person has. They can have $500 worth of debt or $100,000 worth of debt. And by debt, I'm talking about credit cards, medical bills, student loans, car loans, those kind of expenses, but not your mortgage. Your mortgage is a whole different animal, and that comes later. But after you do your budgeting, your first $1,000, and you start working on getting out of debt, then you work on getting 3 to 6 months of living expenses in the bank.
Donna, can I stop you for just a second? And I know, just a disclaimer for everybody, we're going through a lot of steps. You might want to listen to this a few times. This is not new information. This is not information solely on Let's Parent on Purpose. It's really Dave Ramsey's system. And Donna will be glad to help you with this personally if you want. But I did want to ask a question about debt, because this is a common one that comes up. Let's say that I have debt from 4 different sources. Okay, let's say one is a credit card, one of them is a student loan, one of them is a car payment, and then the other is another credit card because I got really good points when I signed up, but then the interest rate is 27%, and there's money on that. I've got these 4 cards, and I feel like I'm just going in circles because I'm putting a little bit on each one, and I don't see them coming down. How am I ever going to get out of debt when I've got it in multiple streams?
First of all, let me do a disclaimer. I am a certified Ramsey financial coach, and that's one of the missions that I do. And so I work Dave Ramsey's steps, and getting out of debt is one of the steps in what we call the debt snowball. Okay, so what you do is you take all of your debt, you write it down on a piece of paper, and you list it according to the smallest debt first. So if you owe $500 on a personal loan to your dad, that one goes first. If you owe $1,000 on a credit card, that goes second. If you owe $12,000 on student loan, that goes third. It doesn't matter what the interest rate is. What we want to do is we want to knock out that debt. So when you're starting, you're basically just paying the least amount you can on every debt. So what we want you to do is pay off the smallest debt first, and then the money that you would have paid next month on the smallest debt, add it to the second smallest debt. Knock that one out. When that one's done, take the money you would have paid for debt 1 and 2 and pay it on debt 3. And it's amazing how quickly you can knock out your debt when you do it that way. And the reason you start with the smallest is because you want to have a victory. You want to see that you're making progress. And so getting rid of one and knowing that out of your 4 debts that you have, now you only have 3 left, it's a really good feeling. And it becomes kind of, when you work with your spouse on it, it becomes kind of a contest. It's like, okay, how much can we pay down this month? How far out of debt can we get this out this month? What can we cut down in our budget to throw more money at our debt? And it's kind of like that. And unfortunately, for people who do have debt, you do have to change your habits.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to do sometimes, but not if you work together on it. And that's the thing I love.
As parents, we feel the pressure to parent well, but life, especially right now, makes it hard. This is why I'm so excited to announce that I will be speaking at the online Perfectly Imperfect Christian Parenting event on October 23rd and 24th. This completely digital event was designed for parents like us as a time to set aside perfection and receive the practical and spiritual help we need. And it's in a very easy, accessible digital format that you'll get to go back and listen to again or access talks all the way through the rest of 2020. The goal is to help you check perfection at the door or at the couch or wherever you're listening and watching and become the perfectly imperfect parent that God has called you to be. I'm particularly excited about my talk on developing a biblical vision of manhood in our children. This is something that has been one of the most centrally important concepts in the last 10 years of my ministry and especially in my parenting. In addition to my talk, there'll be over 40 other short, consumable talks giving you both practical and spiritual advice from some other amazing speakers such as Aaron and Jamie Ivey, Mark Batterson, Jonathan Pitts, Nicole Zazowski, the Duck Dynasty crew, and many, many more. Register today for this digital Christian parenting event at parent.perfectlyimperfect.org, or you can check out the show notes to this podcast episode, or just go to my homepage at letsparentonpurpose.com. 3 easy ways to register. Again, parent.perfectlyimperfect.org, the Let's Parent on Purpose homepage, or just check out the show notes to this episode. We look forward to seeing you there. Finances are either going to strengthen your marriage or rip it apart. And it's whether you're one team or two different people. One of the ones, like, I do counseling a lot with young couples. And I just really caution against having your own separate private banking accounts.
Exactly.
My wife and I, we have a few different bank accounts and our names are on all of them. There's nothing that I have that she cannot access and vice versa. And, the thing is, I fully 100% trust her. I trust her so much. She could have a bank account that I don't have access to and I would still trust her. But I trust her all the more because she's the kind of person that doesn't need to have her own private bank account. And so
Exactly.
we're just on the same team on that. And it makes, you just need high level of trust if you're going to be one with somebody financially over your lifetime. So
yeah. Well, one of the things we always did, let's jump back a minute to the budget. One of the things we always did, even from the minute we got married and had nothing, we started out with nothing. We always had what we called pocket money. Mm-hmm. So even if it was only $5 a week, and that's long time ago, $5 a week doesn't sound like much, but it was back then mm-hmm. when we were first married in 1971. So that $5 was mine. I could do whatever I wanted with it. I could get my nails done. I could have coffee out. I could do whatever I want. So that eliminated the need to have a separate bank account. And if you're going to really get anywhere and end up and have a good retirement later, you have to work together, Jay.
Yeah.
If John and I hadn't worked together, I wouldn't be in the situation that I'm in now, able to live nicely, be up north in the summer, be down south, during the rest of the time, go on mission trips, travel to see my family. It's all because of the hard work. So sometimes you have to sacrifice in the beginning to get what you need later on. And unfortunately, a lot of families today don't understand that because they see everyone around them living in lavish homes, taking lavish vacations, having boats, having everything that they wish they could have and try to have, and then end up in such a pickle they don't think they can get out of it. But one thing I want to say is, it doesn't matter how much debt a family has. There's always a way out.
That's good.
And that's one of the things that a financial coach will do. It'll help you find a way out.
That's great. And hey, just to level people's pride, I always say this. Tiger Woods might have been the greatest golfer of all time. He always had a coach. Michael Jordan,
right,
greatest basketball player of all time, but he didn't really unlock his potential until he had a coach. And in the same way, you might be financially savvy, but having a coach can open up a whole nother set of doors for you. So I want to make sure we get through these last, I think there's 3 more. let's assume we're out of debt now. What do we do
Okay,
next?
so we're out of debt now, and now we work really hard on that 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses, and we keep that in some kind of liquid account that you can get to. You really need to have that because, take for an example what just happened, the COVID-19. A lot of people landed up not having work, and there were periods of time between being out of work and when unemployment kicked in or when your boss began paying you again because they got some money from the CARES Act. So having 3 to 6 months of living expenses set aside, not to be touched unless you have an emergency, can be the difference between life and death for a family. Just knowing that if something comes along totally unexpected, that you can still pay your four walls. And by four walls, we're talking about your rent or mortgage, your food, your electricity and lights, your basic living expense. That's the purpose behind having that emergency fund. And you want to keep that liquid because you want to be able to get to it when you need it. You don't want it tied up in the stock market or invested. It needs to be available so that when there is an emergency, you're able to get your hands on it.
Yeah.
So now that we have 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses, we want to work on paying off the house. Now, some people will say, why should I pay off the house? I get a write-off on my taxes if I, from the interest that I pay on my mortgage. Well, why do you want to pay that interest? And here's the thing. What we're actually working toward is being totally out of debt, including our house, because the more liquid cash you have, the more generous you can be. The more you can do for other people, the more mission trips you can go on, the more you can help your church, the more you can help people in your community. And so that's what we're really striving for. Not only you being financially secure, but also being able to give. So working on paying down the mortgage is really important. There's several Facebook pages that are connected to the Dave Ramsey program, and one is called Hogan's Heroes. And it's one that I follow because they're all people who are working the Dave Ramsey baby steps, and there's all kinds of unique ways that they have found extra money to be able to pay toward their mortgage and pay their mortgages off really early. Just think about it. If you're a homeowner and you have a mortgage right now and tomorrow you didn't, think of all the things you could do with that extra money that you're not paying on your mortgage. Wouldn't that be super?
Yeah, absolutely. And so sometimes I think people think they need to refinance, like you need to go to a 15-year loan. And I know rates are really good right now. That was one my wife and I looked at, and we realized that we have that goal, but we don't have to refinance to a 15-year rate. We can just pay off faster. Like just keep paying on the principal.
Exactly.
And because you might be especially as you're nailing down some of these other baby steps, you might be in a place where locking yourself into, if you've got a 30-year loan, locking yourself into a 15-year loan might cause too much of a strain until you get some of these other things taken care of. So if you have the extra money, you can just pay on principal and you don't have to pay all those closing costs and everything else to refinance unless you can just get a radically better rate by refinancing. So
sometimes it's recommended. It just depends on the situation. And you're right, the rates that you can get. But usually there will be a lot of costs associated with doing that extra mortgage. So doing your mortgage over. So I totally agree with you. If you can pay down more on your principal and just keep hammering away at that, before you know it, you're going to have that mortgage paid off. And it's an unbelievably good feeling. I remember John and I started doing that, and we didn't pay a lot extra every month, but every time we did, it gave us the incentive to want to pay more and to find different ways to cut in our budget so that we could pay more. And I don't mean to tell you we ate rice and beans for our whole entire life, but there are lots of ways that you can cut out in your spending. And as you were saying before, sometimes people need a coach. One of the things I found interesting about financial coaching is that it's one thing for a man and wife to sit down and discuss their budget, but it's another thing when a neutral party sits down with them and looks at that budget and says, gosh, tell me what you buy at the grocery store. This seems to be a really high number for groceries for a family of 4. Tell me about that. And so that's kind of where we're going. So 6 and 7 would be starting to save for your retirement and also for your kids' college. And those are 2 topics that are a whole other podcast. But in the baby steps, and if anybody's interested, all they have to do is Google Dave Ramsey baby steps, and they'll be able to bring it right up on the computer. Dave Ramsey really accentuates saving for your own future before you save for your kids' college.
Yeah, I like
because
that.
there's many, many different ways for kids to go to college, and parents really need to think about their own longevity and what it's going to cost them to live later. And I can really speak to that right now because that's where I am. I'm retired, and I'm thinking about what am I going to do as I get older. And now I can really think seriously about it because we have saved and we did get past all of the baby steps.
Donna, you've been incredibly helpful. We should have just another conversation about some of these later ones. If somebody needs help and they like what they've heard from you, especially you're somebody that's not sat in an elite ivory tower coming up with this stuff, but a mom who raised a special need child as well as the rest of her family, and they want to get in contact with you and talk to you, what's the best way to do that?
The best way would be my email. Since I'm in New Hampshire, my cell phone doesn't work up here.
We will post a link to Donna's email for you to get in contact with her if you want in the show notes, as well as my Things for Thursday email. So, Donna, you're awesome. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Jay.
And
I look forward to seeing you guys when I get home.
Yeah, come back home soon. I'd like to take a minute to tell you about a ministry that has changed my life. Hope Givers is a mission that rescues orphaned and at-risk children in India. They gather the children in hope homes across the nation and feed, clothe, and educate them in the name of Jesus. Many of these children grow up to be pastors or missionaries to the most unreached cities and villages of India and South Asia. Others become doctors, teachers, or just moms and dads with stable jobs raising families, having escaped generations of abject poverty. Not only have I supported Hope Givers over the years, I've also visited hope homes, schools, and churches in India several times. I've even spent Christmas at a hope home in India with my family. Hope Givers is the real deal. If you're looking for a way to give to Jesus this holiday season, I want to encourage your family to purchase a Hope Chest as a Christmas gift for an orphan. You'll provide clothing, toiletries, a blanket, a sweater, school supplies, a toy, and a special Christmas meal for a child that Jesus loves and died for. Find out more at www.hopegivers.org. Friend, I want to thank you so much for listening today. I pray it's been a blessing to you. And if it has, a couple things I would ask of you. Number 1, share it with somebody else so that you can bless them. And number 2, if you believe in the ministry and the Lord has put you in a place to support, would you consider becoming a regular supporter of Let's Parent on Purpose or a one-time giver if that's the spot you're in? You can do so by going to letsparentonpurpose.com and in the top right corner, click the little Give Donate button and become a part of our Patreon support community or a one-time giver. This is Jay Holland, thanking you so much for joining, reminding you there's all kinds of back issues and archives at Let's Parent on Purpose and ChristianParenting.org for you to explore. And I just want to remind you, parenting is a marathon, not a sprint. We'll talk to you soon.